Hello and welcome to my brand new coaster channel. Here I'm going to try and post somewhat often, unlike my last channel. But yeah, hope you enjoy these videos, maybe even subscribe if you do. But in this video, I'm going to be counting down my top 25 roller coasters I've ridden. I haven't been to many theme parks, but here are all the parks I've been to. So there aren't any other coasters on this list from other parks. So unfortunately, there's no Thunder Britain on this list. Also, you're probably going to get very angry watching this, as I have some absolutely terrible opinions. But yeah, let's get on to the list. In number 25, we have 13 at Alton Towers. Spoiler alert, this was the first ever roller coaster to feature a drop track. This is when the track drops, funnily enough. You get some great airtime on that drop. No, not that one. The outside section is fun, it has a good backward section, but the drop track is definitely the highlight of the ride. When I rode this for the first time in 2019, I didn't know anything about the ride, so I was really surprised by the drop track. 13 is definitely a really good family coaster, but a roller coaster that isn't a family coaster is Revolution at the Pleasure Beach Resort. This ride really surprised me, as even though it is an extremely short and simple ride, it delivers some absolutely insane ejector airtime on the drops. All it is just a loop, but you do it again backwards, but it is an intense and underrated ride. Now we are moving all the way to Spain for Uncharted at Ventura. I knew nothing about this ride going into it, but it was actually really good. Again, spoiler alert for those who haven't ridden it, but this ride is extremely complicated. The ride vehicles have a controlled spin, there's 5 launches, a spike, and many backwards, forwards, and sideways sections on this ride. Many people complain about the theming on this ride, but it has the best theming in the park, especially in the queue. While the coaster itself isn't themed much, there are a few screens throughout the ride. Even though this is the most tame ride on the list, this ride is so much fun. From a really long ride to a really short ride, next is Oblivion at Alton Towers. This ride is an incredible drop. I prefer Oblivion's drop to many other incredible drops like Shambhala and Red Force's drops. At the top you get a great view of the Smiler and the X Sector area, and as you go down the drop you get amazing airtime. At the bottom of the drop you also get some insane positive G-forces. The only problem is that is literally the whole ride. After the drop you just turn into the brakes. The Smiler right in front of Oblivion is almost half its size but triple its track length. Another ride that is much longer than Oblivion is Winger's Force at Phantasialand. While being incredibly well themed, this ride also has an amazing layout. It has an elevator lift, then a wild mouse section, then a massive helix, and then, spoiler alert, a sideways tilt track, which really surprised me when I first rode it. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to do Winger's Fear, but I imagine it would place around 21 to 22. Anyway, back over to the UK, the next roller coaster is Rita at Alton Towers. This coaster is extremely underrated as it gets so much hate for being a bad layout and a rough ride. While I don't like the restraints on this ride, the launch is incredible. While Stealth's launch is better, Rita's launch isn't far from it, and the rest of the layout actually has some really good airtime and is a really intense coaster with its low to the ground moments. Next we have 2 coasters from the Disneyland Resort. First is Hyperspace Mountain at Disneyland Paris. This was the first ever inverting coaster I ever rode, and it is a great ride. It has a really good upwards launch which feels way faster than 44 miles per hour. It's a long ride with 3 inversions, great Star Wars theming in the queue and on the ride, although I never noticed the theming when on the ride. So yeah, this is a really good Vekoma launch coaster with 3 inversions at the Disneyland Resort. But another Vekoma launch coaster with 3 inversions at the Disneyland Resort is Rock'n'Roller Coaster at Walt Disney Studios. Right now this ride is called Avengers Assemble Flight Force, which I've heard is much worse than the original. I've never ridden it as Avengers Flight Force, so this is just based on my rides on the original Rock'n'Roller Coaster. The layout on this ride is similar to Hyperspace Mountain with 3 inversions including a Sea Serpent roll and a corkscrew. The theming on Hyperspace Mountain is much better than Rock'n'Roller Coaster, but the reason why I put this above Hyperspace is that launch. The launch on this is much longer, faster, and more seizure-inducing. So this is my favourite roller coaster at the Disneyland Paris Resort, which is quite controversial as most people would say Hyperspace Mountain. Another opinion of mine that is even more controversial is Nemesis in the 17th spot. Now I haven't ridden Nemesis Reborn yet, so my opinion will probably change a bit once I've ridden that, but this is just based on the original Nemesis. The last time I rode this was in 2019, so I don't remember much, but I've just never gone the hype around Nemesis. It's a great ride having whippy inversions, intense helixes, and good theming, but I just prefer other rides on this list. This is my 3rd favourite ride in the park, and it might be 2nd after I finally ride Reborn, but right now I just don't find it better than the 16th spot Wicker Man in the same park. This is my favourite wooden coaster, and also my favourite family coaster if you can even call it one, because this ride is insane. First, this has the best theming of any coaster I've been on. The statue at the front is incredible, as well as the pre-show before the ride. This layout is also great, passing through the statue 3 times, has the best laterals of any coaster, and also some great airtime. Time for the first hypercoaster on the list, which is the big one at the Pleasure Beach Resort. I find this ride extremely underrated. Many people complain that this ride has a boring layout, and while I do agree, there is one element on this ride that is so insane I had to put it this high, and that is of course the first drop. Especially in the back, you get violently thrown to the side, feeling like you're going to fly out of the train. Of course this isn't going to happen, but this drop literally feels dangerous, which is what makes it so insane. For lots of people, this drop is a bit too much, but I love it, so it's my favourite drop of any coaster. Yes, I do prefer big ones drop to Hyperias. What is wrong with me? But unfortunately, the rest of the ride does meander a lot and is quite rough, so I had to place it here in number 15. However, an even rougher ride is Furious Baco at Ventura. In the back, this ride is terrible. It's probably the roughest ride I've ever ridden. You just bounce up and down, hitting your head on the uncomfortable restraints. Based on a back row ride, this would probably place it around 50. However, a front row ride is a must-do at the resort. In the front, the launch is amazing, my second favourite launch behind Red Force. The low to the ground layout is extremely intense, there's great hang time on the inline twist, and it is way smoother in the front. A front row ride on Furious Baco would place at 7, but due to every other row being rough, this places at 14. In the same park, we have Dragon Khan. This is an extremely intense B&M looper with 8 inversions. Every single inversion on this ride is so intense, it's a really long ride, great pacing, and the 0G roll is really whippy. My only complaint with this ride is that it is a little bit repetitive, however each inversion is great. Another B&M coaster is Nemesis Inferno at Fort Park. I am probably the only coaster enthusiast to ever exist who prefers this to the Alton Towers version, but I just prefer this layout as it's a much longer ride, the interlocking corkscrews are really whippy, and I love the pre-lift section. Nemesis Inferno is actually my favourite inverter coaster, as unfortunately Black Mamba at Fantasialand was close on my visit. Anyway, now we are going from an underrated ride to an overrated ride. Next we have Icon at the Pleasure Beach Resort. Icon is an extremely fun Mack multi-launch coaster with an extremely fun layout, great airtime, and a really long ride time. It's crazy how they managed to fit this ride in between all the other rides Icon interacts with, like the Big One, Steeplechase, and Big Dipper. While this ride is a bit overrated, it is still a great experience, even though it has some of the weakest launches ever. Starting off with the top 10, we have Soar the Ride at Fort Park. This is an incredibly underrated ride, getting lots of hate for its roughness, but to be honest, I actually think it's been getting smoother and smoother. My first rides were quite rough, but recently this ride has actually been running decently smooth. Soar is a really long layout filled with many great inversions and really good hang time and some really good theming. This is the best themed coaster in the park, with the theming around the drop, in the queue, and in the indoor section. But my favourite part of the ride is the extremely unexpected ejector airtime on lots of the drops on this ride. You just go flying on the drop off of the mid-course brake run, the indoor drop, and this insane airtime hill. The beyond vertical 100-degree drop is also great and delivers great airtime. Due to the quality and length of this ride, it had to make the top 10, but a much shorter ride is Stealth at the opposite side of the park. This Intamin hydraulic launch coaster is the fastest accelerating roller coaster in the world, and you can definitely tell when on the ride. Especially in the front, the launch is so punchy, even though the wind tries to suffocate you. You also get great airtime at the top, and the hill leading into the brake run. While it is incredibly short, it is an extremely thrilling ride. The third ride in a row at Fort Park is the Swarm. This is my favourite wing coaster I've ridden, even though I've only ridden 2. Well, unless you count Shambhala somehow. This ride is everything. Theming, intensity, hang time, near misses, airtime. Actually, never mind. The Swarm is such an intense ride with lots of hang time on each of the inversions, and there are so many head chopper elements like the plane, billboard, and station. The wing over drop is also incredible. While the Swarm is short, it packs so much into its ride time. Finally, we have a coaster not in Fort Park, but still in the UK. Next is Enzo at the Pleasure Beach Resort. It is questionable whether this is a separate coaster, and while it is the same coaster, it is a much different experience. Enzo is basically just Icon, which placed at the 11th spot, but with a spinning seat. Everything that I said about Icon applies to Enzo, but is way more insane. Every element can be experienced sideways, backwards, or forwards, making a much more disorientating but fun ride experience. This also means it is a much more re-rideable coaster. Well, it would be if it wasn't so extremely overpriced. But another ride that can be extremely disorientating for some people is the Smiler at Alton Towers. In my opinion, this is the best coaster in the park and is such an underrated ride. The Smiler gets lots of hate for being a gimmicky and rough ride, but I have to disagree. First off, it's an extremely long ride with a 2-minute 45-second ride time, and even though half of that is going up the ridiculously slow lift hill, it feels like this ride goes on forever. And the inversions on the Smiler are actually really creative, unlike some other inversion-heavy coasters I've ridden like Dragon Con and Colossus. It has the only Staffordshire knot in the world, multiple sidewinders, a sea serpent roll, and much more. If Intamin built this, it would have just been 14 hardline rolls. However, the best part of the ride is those 2 insane ejector airtime hills that try to launch you out of your seat. I don't know how a ride with 14 inversions has this tiny airtime hill as its best element, but I'm not complaining. Also, I love the demented theming on this ride, and the music in the queue drives me absolutely insane. But I think it's crazy how they managed to fit 14 inversions into such a small plot of land. And while the last 3 inversions are quite rough, it doesn't take too much away from the ride experience, which is why the Smiler places at 6. Starting off the top 5, we have Fly at Phantasialand. This is my favourite flying coaster. Again, I've only done 2. This has an incredible layout with 2 launches, 2 inversions, and over 4,000 feet of track, making it the longest flying coaster. This ride is absolutely insane, flying around one of the greatest themed areas in the world. It has 2 amazing launches, and the hill after the second launch gives great flow to airtime, which I didn't even think was possible on a flying coaster. Fly is known for being the best flying coaster in the world. Well, it's either Fly or Flying Dinosaur, which are 2 completely different rides. But yeah, Fly is amazing, but isn't actually the best multi-launch coaster in the park, as in number 4 is Taron at Phantasialand. Taron is insane, speeding past all of the insane rock work with so many head choppers. There's lots of airtime spread out through this insanely long ride. The 2 launches are great, especially the second launch. It feels like a mini Red Force launch, kind of. Taron feels so much faster than it actually is, and it is just a really fun coaster. However, it isn't my favourite launch coaster, as in 3rd place we have Red Force at Ferrari Land. There isn't much to say about Red Force, as it is literally just a bigger and better version of Stealth, but that launch is so incredible, easily the best launch I've ever experienced, well, if you're not getting hit by a bird. That launch is also my favourite element of any coaster I've been on, especially in the front, it's amazing. The top hat as well can give some good airtime, and the hill into the brake one as well. And my night ride on Red Force was absolutely insane. This is why we shouldn't close theme parks at 6 UK theme parks. Red Force is insane, but actually not my favourite at the resort, as in 2nd place we have Shambhala. This is a B&M Hyper, which many people say is the best B&M Hyper in the world, and I can definitely see why. Every single hill delivers amazing airtime. The first Camelback gives around 7 to 8 seconds of airtime, which is just insane. This ride is the best airtime of any coaster I've been on. The turnaround is very intense and has some great head chopper moments with the supports. It also has a great splashdown, unlike another ride I know, and the view from the top of Shambhala is insane. The only reason why this isn't in the number 1 spot is because it does get a little bit repetitive. If this had a bigger variation of elements, it would have probably been in number 1. Before I reveal the number 1 spot, as you definitely don't know already, here are some honourable mentions that were close to making the list. Colorado Adventure is a really well-themed coaster at Phantasialand. Big Thunder Mountain is also a mine train, but at Disneyland. Galaxica at Alton Towers was the first ever B&M flying coaster. Colossus at Fort Park was the first ever roller coaster to feature 10 inversions. And finally, Spinball Wizard at Alton Towers is a fun Mauer spinning coaster. Now it is time for the number 1 spot, and it is of course Hyperia at Fort Park. This is a Mack hypercoaster that opened last year and has an absolutely insane layout. With its twisted drop to its dive loop stool thing to whatever this is, it's an insane well-paced coaster. I love the uniqueness of its elements, and they all give different unique sensations. Hyperia is everything: hang time, intensity, airtime, theming. Well, it's actually got really good theming if it's themed to mud. Even though it has many flaws, like why does this splashdown exist? It slows the train down way too much, it doesn't get the riders wet, and you can't even see it in the park. Anyway, all the elements apart from that thing are excellent. And it is a bit short, but it's still by far the best ride in the UK and my favourite coaster I've been on. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I'll try and make more every few weeks, but this took way too long, so it might turn out like my last channel. Anyway, I've spent too long on this video, so goodbye.